Your fascia is not aging, it is drying out. This is the distinction that changes everything. And almost no one has told you, beneath your skin, running in an unbroken luminous web through every layer of your body, there is a tissue so vast, so architecturally extraordinary, that it connects your scalp to the soles of your feet without a single interruption. It wraps every muscle fiber, cradles every organ, sheathes every nerve, and lines the corridors between your bones. It is not passive scaffolding. It is alive, it is sensing. And in most human bodies alive today, it is slowly, silently calcifying. And here is the quiet tragedy of that fact. While you have been told to stretch more, to take a supplement, to exercise harder, to sleep better, the real source of your stiffness and your fatigue, and the vague sense that your body is somehow becoming less, yours has been crystallizing in the spaces between all of those efforts. Stillness hardens it. Chronic stress compresses it. Shallow breathing, the kind most people do every single hour of their modern lives, starves it of the rhythmic pressure it needs to remain hydrated and supple and intelligent. And the longer that process continues unremedied, the more the body begins to operate not as a fluid, integrated living system, but as something closer to a suit of biological armor, rigid on the inside, defended, cut off from its own sensation. Ancient yogic physicians in India called the rivers of energy moving through this connective tissue. The nadis, the subtle channels through which prana, life force, was understood to flow. Taoist healers in China mapped something almost identical and called it the meridian system, and they spent centuries developing movement arts specifically designed to keep those channels open, hydrated, permeable. These traditions had no electron microscopes. They had something arguably more refined: the capacity for deep somatic observation across generations of practitioners who paid exquisite attention to the body as the soul's first and most faithful translator. They knew that when this web of life goes still and dry, the person inside it begins to age in ways that no herb and no discipline of the mind can fully reverse. What they knew through perception, modern science is only now beginning to confirm through instrumentation. Dr. Muriel Jean-Claude Gimberteau, a French hand surgeon and researcher, did something that no one had quite managed before. He inserted a microscopic camera beneath living human skin and filmed the fascia in motion, in real time, in a body that was breathing and moving and alive. What he found was not the inert white tissue that medical students had been shown in cadavers for 2 centuries. What he found was something that looked, unmistakably, like weather. It pulsed. It shimmered. It reorganized itself in fractal, self-similar patterns that bore a closer resemblance to a living ecosystem than to a mechanical support structure. His footage, compiled in the documentary Strolling Under the Skin, forced a re-evaluation of what fascia even is, and what becomes possible when you understand it, not as packaging, but as your body's primary communication network. This is the transformation this offers you, not information to add to what you already know. A felt return to a state of aliveness you have been quietly grieving. To understand why slow oscillating movement does what it does to this tissue, you need to understand the word piezoelectricity, because it is the physical law that governs how your fascia actually thinks. Piezoelectricity is the property certain crystalline materials have of generating an electrical charge in response to mechanical pressure. Your fascia is a collagen matrix, and collagen is piezoelectric. This means that when you move your fascia, when you compress it and release it with intention, it generates bioelectric signals. Those signals travel. They communicate with your cells, your nervous system, your immune regulation pathways. Dr. Elaine Lankovin, a researcher at Harvard Medical School and the director of the OSHA Center for Integrative Medicine, has spent decades studying exactly this mechanism. Her work demonstrated that gentle, sustained mechanical stimulation of connective tissue triggers measurable biochemical changes at the cellular level, including the downregulation of inflammation, the release of hyaluronic acid into the fascial matrix, and shifts in gene expression that are consistent with tissue repair and regeneration. Hyaluronic acid is the key fluid here. It is produced by specialized cells called fibroblasts that live within your fascial web, and it is what keeps the sliding surfaces between fascial layers smooth, lubricated, and capable of gliding past one another as you move. When you are sedentary, when you breathe shallowly, and carry chronic tension in your body, the production of hyaluronic acid slows, and what was fluid begins to gel. Dr. Robert Schleip, a German researcher and fascial anatomy expert at Ulm University, has studied this process extensively and described what happens when fascial hydration is lost over time. The layers begin to adhere to one another. The tissue loses its capacity for what he calls the creep and recoil response, that elastic intelligence that allows a body to absorb force and return to form. This is not metaphor. This is measurable structural collapse happening inside you, incrementally, every day that your body is not given the specific input it requires to reverse it. That input is not vigorous exercise. Vigorous exercise, in fact, can compound the problem when the fascia is already dehydrated, because it imposes rapid loading on tissue that has lost its capacity to respond. What fascia requires is something far more ancient in its logic: slow wave-like, oscillating motion that moves through the body in long continuous chains rather than isolated segments. Motion that follows the actual anatomical pathways of the fascial lines, which researcher Thomas Myers mapped comprehensively in his landmark work, Anatomy Trains, demonstrating that your body does not move in isolated muscles but in long tensional meridians that run from one end of the structure to the other. When you move in harmony with those lines, you are doing something that is both biomechanically precise and profoundly systemic. You are rehydrating the entire matrix, restoring its piezoelectric signaling, and returning to the nervous system the sensory data it needs to regulate inflammation, pain, and the cascading hormonal processes that govern how quickly or slowly you biologically age. The ancient world did not have Thomas Myers. It did not need him. In the Taoist internal arts tradition of China, practices like Dao Yin and later Qigong were designed around a principle that is thousands of years old: that health is not the absence of disease but the unobstructed circulation of vital energy through the body's connective pathways. The movements prescribed were never sharp or forceful. They were wave-like, continuous, deliberately slow, arising from the center of the body and rippling outward to the extremities in the way that water moves. Practitioners understood intuitively that the spaces between the structures mattered as much as the structures themselves. They were, without laboratory confirmation, working directly with fascial hydration. In the yogic tradition of India, the practice of yin yoga, drawn from far older roots, asks the practitioner to hold long, passive, supported shapes that apply sustained, gentle traction to the deep fascial layers. The Hatha Yoga Pradipika, written in the 15th century, describes this as opening the nadis, and what is remarkable is how precisely that metaphor maps onto what Lanvin's research later showed: that sustained mechanical loading of connective tissue triggers measurable fluid exchange within the tissue matrix. The ancient practitioners described the sensation as rivers opening. The modern researcher described it as mechanotransduction. They are pointing to the same phenomenon. The Hermetic tradition, articulated most clearly in the Kybalion, offers the principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. Applied to the body, this principle suggests that life is not a static state to be maintained, but a dynamic oscillation to be sustained. The body that loses its rhythm does not simply slow down. It begins to reverse the direction of its own vitality. This is precisely what happens in fascial calcification, and it is precisely what rhythmic oscillating movement reverses. Thomas Myers himself, speaking in interviews about the implications of his work, has acknowledged that many traditional movement systems were operating with a functional understanding of the fascial body that Western anatomy spent centuries inadvertently dismantling by studying corpses rather than living tissue. He was not discovering something new. He was rediscovering a language that the body has always spoken, and that a great many ancient cultures had already learned to read. There is a pattern that brings people to a threshold like this, and it is quiet, and it is cumulative. It is not one event, but a slow accumulation of years in which the body has been pushed rather than listened to, stretched past its signals rather than moved along its actual grain. You have probably tried things. You have probably been consistent for a while with something that helped a little and then plateaued. The stiffness returned. The fatigue returned. The feeling of being somehow compressed inside your own life returned, because the tool you were using was addressing the symptom and not the source. The guide called Healing in Motion 22 Somatic Cycles, Release Trauma, Restore Flow and Return to Creation was built for exactly that threshold. It is a structured daily practice organized around 22 somatic movement cycles, each one designed to work through a specific fascial line, restore fluid motion to a specific region of the body, and over time re-establish the nervous system's capacity to feel safe enough to release the stored compression that accumulates not just from physical stillness but from the emotional and psychological weight the fascia holds on the body's behalf, because fascia holds history. And these cycles, practice with the slow intentionality the tissue requires, give it permission to let that history go. The people who have moved through this practice have described things that go beyond flexibility or comfort. They have described feeling return to themselves. Those accounts, unedited and specific, are pinned in the first comment below this video, and they are worth reading before you decide whether this is for you. The link to the guide is there as well, and it is available for a limited time. So if something in what you have heard today feels like recognition rather than information, that first comment is where you go next. The science did not arrive first. The body knew. What researchers are now measuring in laboratories with instruments of extraordinary sensitivity is something that practitioners of somatic tradition have been transmitting body to body, generation to generation for thousands of years. And what makes this moment singular? What makes the convergence happening right now between ancient somatic wisdom and modern biological science so worth your full attention is that the confirmation is no longer partial or suggestive. It is arriving in cascades. Stephen Porges spent decades developing what he named polyvagal theory, a framework that fundamentally reordered how neuroscience understands the relationship between the body and the nervous system. What Porges demonstrated is that the vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in the human body, is not a single pathway, but a hierarchical system of responses that determines whether your physiology operates in a state of safety, of mobilization for threat, or of shutdown. And the crucial finding, the one that connects directly to everything you have been learning about fascia, is that the body's ability to access its ventral vagal state, the state of genuine safety in social engagement and cellular repair, is mediated not through thought but through sensation, through breath, through slow rhythmic movement, through the felt sense of the body returning to itself. The fascia, as a sensory organ containing more nerve endings than any other tissue in the body, is one of the primary surfaces through which the nervous system receives that message of safety. Bessel van der Kolk, the psychiatrist and researcher whose landmark work, The Body Keeps the Score, transformed the clinical understanding of trauma, made a point that resonates at exactly this intersection. He documented, through decades of clinical evidence, that unresolved stress and trauma are not stored in memory as narrative. They are stored in the body as tension, as pattern, as the chronic muscular and fascial bracing that the nervous system encodes when it has learned to expect danger. The fascia, in this light, is not merely a physical structure. It is a tissue of biographical record, holding the compressed history of every stress response the body was never given permission to complete and release. The field of epigenetics, advanced substantially by researchers like Bruce Lipton in his work on the biology of belief, has established that gene expression is not fixed. It is responsive to cellular environment, to mechanical signaling, to the biochemical conditions created by how you move, breathe, and inhabit your own body. What this means is extraordinary in its implications. The slow oscillating movement that hydrates your fascia and restores its piezoelectric signaling is not simply improving flexibility. It is creating the cellular conditions under which your genes express differently. The biology of aging, in measurable, documentable ways, is being rewritten by the quality of your motion. Science is confirming what the mystics already knew in their bones. Literally. Here then is the protocol. Not a concept, a practice you can begin today in the body you have right now, exactly as it is. Lie down on a firm surface, a yoga mat or a carpeted floor, and allow the full weight of your body to surrender into that support. Take 30 seconds simply to notice where you are not fully resting, where something is still bracing, still holding, still managing. This noticing is not correction. It is the beginning of conversation with tissue that has been waiting for exactly this quality of attention. Begin your breath, not in the chest, but in the lower belly. allowing it to soften and expand on the inhale like a tide coming in, and then releasing slowly without force on the exhale like a tide retreating. Spend 2 to 3 minutes only here, not breathing correctly. Breathing presently, the fascia of the thoracic cavity, the tissue wrapping your lungs and heart and the organs of your trunk, begins to receive rhythmic hydrating pressure the moment this quality of breath is established. And if you bring your awareness there, you may begin to feel a subtle warmth, a softening that was not available to you 60 seconds ago. From here, introduce the first oscillation. Begin to rock your knees slowly from side to side, allowing the motion to arise from the pelvis and travel up the spine in a gentle undulation. This is not a stretch. You are not trying to increase range of motion. You are initiating a wave. Think of the way seaweed moves in current, responsive, continuous, arising from its root rather than its edges. Allow the movement to be so small at first that it is barely visible, and then let it find its own amplitude. 3 to 5 minutes here. Next, transition to a seated position and bring the movement into the spine directly. With each exhale, allow the spine to curl forward gently from the sacrum, vertebra by vertebra, like a wave moving up a shore. With each inhale, allow it to open and extend, not forcefully, but as a response to the breath's natural lift. This spinal wave, practiced slowly and continuously, traverses the posterior fascial line that Thomas Myers identified as running from the soles of the feet, up the back of the body to the crown of the skull. You are not moving a muscle. You are moving a river. Finish with 5 minutes standing, feet hip-width apart, knees soft, and allow the body to find micro-oscillation in place. Let the weight shift almost imperceptibly. Let the arms drift and sway. Let the breath move the torso. Ancient Taoist practitioners called this standing in the stream. You are not doing anything. You are allowing the river to remember its own current. Practice this daily, 15 to 20 minutes. The results do not come from intensity. They come from consistency and from the quality of attention you bring. There is a woman, not a name you will find in a study, but a pattern you will recognize, because she is composite and she is real. She is in her mid-50s. She has practiced yoga for 20 years, and she is still stiff in the mornings. She has tried every supplement protocol, worked with 2 excellent physical therapists, and gone through a period of running that helped her mood, but left her hips aching in ways she could not explain. She moves through her days feeling, as she once described it, like she is wearing herself as a costume, rather than living inside herself from the inside out. She begins the oscillating practice not with hope exactly, but with the particular exhaustion of someone who has tried enough things to have let go of expectation. She lies on the floor for the first time in years, not to do anything, and the strangeness of that alone makes her eyes fill. She breathes into her belly and feels, for the first time she can remember, the floor receiving her weight rather than her weight fighting the floor. Within 2 weeks, she notices that mornings feel different. Not dramatically, the way light feels different at a slightly later hour, a warmth in the quality of it rather than its intensity. The stiffness is still there, but it is less solid, more like something that moves when she does rather than something she is managing around. Within a month, she begins to feel her body's internal topography again. The felt sense of her own interior landscape that she had not realized she had lost because the losing of it had been so gradual as to seem like normal. What she finds is not a body that has been fixed. What she finds is a body that has been remembered. By her. By itself. The distinction matters enormously, and she feels it in the difference between a stretching session that leaves her feeling temporarily better and a morning oscillation practice that leaves her feeling recognizably herself. She is not a story of recovery. She is a story of return. And return is a different kind of journey, because the destination is not somewhere new. It is somewhere you have always already been. The obstacle to beginning this practice is not time. It is cultural. You live inside a civilization that has told you, in 10,000 ways and from the earliest age, that effort is virtue and stillness is laziness, and that if something is not difficult, it is not working. The deep logic of fascia work violates every one of those premises. It is slow when you have been taught that slow is insufficient. It is gentle when you have been told that transformation requires force. It asks you to feel rather than to push, and feeling, in a culture that prizes performance, can register as vulnerability rather than intelligence. There is also the more personal resistance, the one that lives in the tissue itself. When you begin to move with this quality of sustained, present, oscillating attention, things that have been held in the body begin to surface. Not always dramatically, more often as a sudden emotion without a story, a grief or an irritability, or an unexpected tenderness that arrives and passes through. This is not pathology. It is completion. It is the nervous system finally processing what it stored when the moment of storage did not allow for full expression. The fascia, as van der Kolk's work makes clear, holds what the mind could not afford to feel. And when you give it the conditions of safety and rhythm and slow decompression, it begins, carefully, to let things go. The way through this resistance is not to push through it. It is to make the practice so small that resistance has nothing to grip. Begin with 5 minutes. Begin lying down. Begin with only the breath and the belly, and the permission to do nothing except feel the floor. You do not have to believe this will work. Belief is not what activates fascia. Presence is. And presence can be accessed even when you are skeptical, even when you are tired, even when a part of you is certain that you are too far gone for something this gentle to reach you. That part is wrong, and it will know it within a week. What this practice ultimately reveals is not information about your body. It is information about what your body is. Ida Rolf, the biochemist and somatic pioneer who developed structural integration and spent her life studying the intelligence of connective tissue, said something that should have changed medicine and will, eventually. The body is a plastic medium, and it can be changed. Not pushed, not forced, changed, the way a river changes a landscape, through persistence and through flow. She understood that the fascia is not simply the body's architecture, it is the body's memory, its accumulated response to gravity and time and lived experience, and that it retains the capacity for reorganization at any age, under any conditions, provided the input given to it respects its actual nature. Her work, carried forward through researchers like Schleip and Langevin and Myers, confirms what she felt with her hands over decades of practice. The body is not declining toward rigidity. It is waiting to be given permission to remember its original fluency. This is the reframe that matters most. Aging, as it manifests in the fascial body, is not entropy. It is not the irreversible march toward dissolution that the cultural narrative of physical decline would have you believe. It is dehydration. It is compression. It is a forgetting, and forgetting, unlike entropy, can be reversed because the body's original state, the one it arrived in, the one it occupied before stillness and stress and shallow breath began to harden its inner rivers, that state is not lost, it is latent. It is waiting beneath the armor for the exact quality of motion that will call it back to the surface. You are not trying to become something you have never been. You are returning to what you have always been, beneath the calcification, beneath the bracing, beneath the years of being somewhere other than fully, sensorially, fluidly here. If what you heard today landed somewhere below the level of thought, somewhere in the body itself, leave a comment right now that says, "I am returning to flow," not because it is a performance of intention, but because typing those words is the first oscillation, a small deliberate motion in the direction of the river you have been told had dried up. It has not. It is waiting. If this channel has given you something today, give it something back, a like, a subscription, the notification bell turned on, so that the next piece of work finds you as this one did. Share this with the person in your life who you have watched quietly shrinking into their own stiffness. Because sometimes the greatest gift is simply saying, "There is something you have not yet been told," and it changes everything. The mission of this channel is the same mission the ancient somatic traditions held, to return people to the felt knowledge of their own bodies, because a person who lives inside their body fully is a person who cannot be convinced they are broken. Click the video on your screen now, and let the next part of this remembering begin.